Whether you're moving overseas with your family, relocating employees on assignment, moving your organisation's workplace, or transporting and storing high-value art or information, logistics in the modern world is complex. Our new podcast brings you expert voices to share insight, discuss trends, and offer practical advice, all with a view to making it simpler for you to live, work, and do business anywhere in the world. March is International Women's Month, a month celebrating, recognising and championing women all over the world. So to mark this significant occasion and cap off a series of activities, we're bringing you a two-part CrownCast special. Hosted by Reema Prabhakar, a panel of women from across Crown's family of businesses discuss how they navigate the modern global workplace. So to take you through part 2 of our International Women's Month special, here's Reema. Wherever you are in the world, welcome to CrownCast.
Hello and welcome to a very special Women's Day episode of CrownCast. I am Reema, your host for this episode, and thank you for joining us today for a thought-provoking discussion on women in the global workplace. In this second part of my conversation on this topic, we will delve into work-life balance and how do we overcome some of the challenges we spoke about in part 1. We will also explore how work and the workplace itself are both evolving and what the future has in store for us. I am joined again by Jo, Sherry, and Jackie, 3 senior women from across Crown's global footprint who have had a range of experiences to shed light on how they've overcome any challenges, seized opportunities, developed their careers, and much more. So, let's dive in. So we were talking about the many factors that affect women's professional lives and how we endeavor to achieve work-life balance, which can honestly sometimes feel more like a struggle than a juggle. And I was curious to hear from all of you how you manage that piece in your life. How do you balance professional and personal life? Does it feel more like a struggle, juggle, or a balance? Sherry, would you like to share?
Well, I have to talk about another advantage being on assignment in Hong Kong and other actually places in Asia or where it's quite common to have help at home. So domestic help at home. There's amazing women who are working in Hong Kong and other places, supporting working women like myself. We're both working women, but they're supporting me, at home with childcare because daycare is very uncommon in Hong Kong. So there's almost no concept of daycare where you would kind of drop off your infant or your child and go to work and pick them back up. So that being almost non-existent, it's because you have people who support you at home, and so your kids can stay at home, which meant a lot to me. It gave me a sense of, I guess, a peace of mind, so that I could go and be really fully committed at work, mentally and emotionally. It was still difficult being separated from, my baby at that time, but I knew that she was at home and she's being cared for by someone I knew one-on-one, and that just meant the world to me. So I think over time, I've learned how to develop a very important support system so that without it, I would really not be able to, balance much of anything. So I'm so grateful for the support system I had create in my life in order to make my life function, because, it would be very difficult otherwise. Pre-pandemic, there was a lot of demands for travel as well, and I had teams around the world that I had to see, and so there are times when, I would be kind of on the road a lot more during the year. I'm very grateful post-pandemic that has changed a lot because, it's much better for, I think, our lives. My children are getting older, that I am home more, I am present more. So right now, I can't complain, very importantly, though, I did have to develop that support network, and I think a lot of women who find it a lot more challenging, they struggle probably a lot more with balancing all of the demands of life and work.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think It's never an absolute balance as well. I think it, at different times, based on what's going on, you're prioritizing different things. I also rely very heavily on, well, we're not as lucky in the UK to have the help, the extra help, which I am used to that having grown up in Asia myself, but it is something we miss here. But I think I still quite heavily rely on my own support network of women, whether that's friends who've become family, whether that's, on a professional level as well, having, whether that's mentors or being part of a professional network. And I think that support inside and outside of work, like you said, Sherry, is so important. It really helps put into place that work-life balance piece when you just know that that support is available, whether that's sometimes, even to have a conversation if it's not actually, someone helping you in your day-to-day. Jo and Jackie, how do you manage your work and life, and do you have such support networks that you rely on?
Well, yeah, I don't have children, but I have two fur babies. I've got two dogs, and my husband works from home predominantly, so he kind of looks after them for us. But when we talk about networks, I've been very actively involved with the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management for a long time, and they have a Women in FM special interest group that I was lucky enough to be chair of for a number of years. And it's an absolutely fantastic network of women that are all encouraging, all supportive. You're very much welcomed into the group when you go to their events and when you meet with them. And over the years, people that I have met along the way that I've helped and they've helped me now become, I can call them friends. There's a handful of people that have become amazing women in my life that I would never have met if it wasn't for that group that I joined. And so I'd always encourage people to do that in their careers. There'll always be groups specific to your industry or your area of work, and also there's normally a specific women's network as well within that, and so I would advocate getting involved in those.
Yeah.
What about you, Jo?
Yeah. So I think Sherry will understand this, and maybe you have the same experience. Our industry is huge, but it's quite small in that everybody knows everybody. And I'm very lucky that I have a really strong network of women in the global mobility industry that I respect greatly, and that I look up to, who are always there to chat to and discuss any challenges that we're having about being female. But we have a very different experience, right? Because global mobility is very female heavy in terms of the industry. So there's plenty of people to pick for to get in your network. I think the balance for me, and I'm drifting into Jackie's world here, I think the balance for me is I have been a remote worker since 2009. So full time, working from home. And my struggle is when work and home life tend to, the lines get blurred. And it got a lot better during the pandemic when everyone was working from home. I think people were very much more respectful of time. But it's not uncommon for people to send me a meeting planner for a call at 5 o'clock in the morning, my time. And expect not send me an email and say, do you mind? But just the assumption that because I'm walking from one side of my home to the other, that's going to be, completely okay. And so I think my balance is trying to know when to say no, know when to understand that in a global industry, you're going to have to do that sometimes. And Sherry, you probably get the calls on the other end of the day, right? You probably do more night calls.
I do.
Yeah. And it's the same thing, right? We want to work in this industry, so we understand it. But yeah, I think trying to balance that, because my husband also works from home, and when work time is done, and then you can actually start to relax. So I think there's this balance that I try to do on when is no an okay answer. I'm not very good at saying no.
Absolutely. I think, setting those boundaries with work and your personal life definitely help in that work-life balance. And that also is a little bit of a good segue into, we spoke about remote working and the pandemic, and obviously after the pandemic, hybrid working or working from home and a little bit in the office. It became the norm, which, like you said, in some ways has its challenges, but also has opened the doors for many women to return back to work, either part time or full time, using flexible working patterns. And I think on the back of that, we've also seen many companies, the workplace itself undergoing changes. We often read now in the media conversations around what the future of work and hence the workplace looks like. So, Jackie, this is a question that most companies are grappling with, that what does the future of the workplace look like? So, what have you seen, since COVID and in the years following it, and how do you see that evolving? I know you said a little earlier that you think work from home is here to stay. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Okay, so pre-pandemic, there were some companies that were completely resistant to working in any way, in a flexible way at all. The pandemic forced a lot of people in to do that, and from that they realised they invested in the technology that actually enabled their teams to work in that manner, and so they then trusted their teams to work in that manner because they didn't really have much choice at that point in time, and they realised there's a lot of benefit to be had to that, both for the employee and the employer. Post-pandemic, we're going through that piece where hybrid was very much here to stay, and a lot of people had actually managed their life around that. People like myself took the opportunity to relocate in that time, and choose where they wanted to live, and because you can work from anywhere. Work is something that you do, it's not somewhere where you go. However, in the last 12 months, we've seen a lot of the large blue chip corporates ask their staff to return to the office. And what you really have to be careful not to do is that disconnect is if you leave your staff to be too nomadic in their work style, they become disconnected and disenfranchised of who they actually work for. And so it's very much about that engagement piece. It's about managing on output and staying in regular communication with your team. But I do truly believe, I think hybrid's going to stay. There's no one size fits all. Every industry is different, whether you're a media company, you're a finance company, you're in retail. Everybody's needs are different. So hence the work that I do, where we go in and we study how people work in their space. That really helps lend itself to the decisions that can be made around how they address the workforce and their working style. But yeah, it's an interesting time. There's a number of, like I say, the big corporates that saying they're mandating people back to work. I don't actually endorse that. It's all about balance. I think if you can have 2 to 3 days in the office or 2 to 3 days at home a week, that's a really good balance. Because I tend to do battle with my inbox when I'm at home. The email, we all live at the peril of our email inboxes. But when I'm in the office, I want to see the people that I work with. I want to take the opportunity to collaborate, to discuss things that are ongoing, and have that interaction. It's really important. But yeah, I advocate a balance, to be honest.
Because I think those forced returns disproportionately impact female workers, don't they? Because it tends to be the female worker that will make the sacrifice and say, "Oh, okay, I can't commit to 5 days in the office because childcare is too expensive," or and so I think companies need to consider the talent drain that the unintended consequence of a forced return might be.
There's an expectation now that when you're one of the highest achieving students leaving university, that there's a list of what they want. There's a criteria, and if you're not offering that as an employer, then you're not going to get the talent walk through your front door. I think we're much more aware now of people's needs and what they need to be functional and get the best out of people. One of my friend's daughters works for an insurance company, and they allow them to have a break between 2:30 and 3:30 every day, so that the parents within their organisation can collect their children from school. You know, all these things help you be an employer of choice, and we have to really be in tune to that.
So, Reema, that kind of touches on something that I was reading, that in India, it's quite common, especially in major metropolitan areas, because people travel a fair distance and have quite a commute to get to work, that that they let women go early to get home before it gets dark, but it's on the understanding that they'll then resume work for an hour or two when they get back. And I was reading that that's kind of a cultural norm, and that some Western managers, when they relocate to India, don't understand that and kind of push back on it, but that's quite common. And I was wondering, before you relocated, was that an experience that you had?
Well, actually, I worked in media and entertainment, so I had a very different experience. We were working late in the night, often doing and things like that at 2:00 in the morning. But I didn't have a child then, so I was able to have that lifestyle. But it is, I guess it depends, on industries and companies. And certainly there are companies in India who would be sensitive to, women's work patterns. Also thinking about, sometimes traveling late at night is not considered safe in some parts of the country, etc. So those things would be definitely, in consideration for such kinds of policies. But yeah, it's really nice to hear that companies are actually making it simpler for women to work. And I think that the pandemic has definitely contributed to that, because it's been, I think, post the pandemic, thanks to the flexible work opportunities, it has been much simpler for women to at least get that little breathing space to juggle their lives better, to be able to work from home, which was not necessarily available prior to it. And Sherry, I'm curious to hear from you, because I think in Asia it is a little bit different, isn't it?
Well, so many things are, occurring through me in this great discussion, and one is that I think we can reframe the way that we think about balance, because when you have a hybrid working situation, I think there's more about integration. It's not, work life and then your outside work life. When you're able to, throughout a day, whether it's you have that 1 hour from that company, or you have, 2 days a week where you can be at home, and so ultimately your life becomes more integrated, and it doesn't feel that, you're sacrificing, too many things. And slipping in other areas. So I really like the sense that the discussion of balance actually evolves, because the way that we live now between work and life, there's, so much more that's easier, simpler, connected, because we're either at home able to take care of a few things that wouldn't have been possible before. And I think there was a greater stigma attached as well. It's all now equalize the sense that we can work from home and be productive and be engaged, and that there's no stigma attached to it anymore. It's not that somehow you're lesser because you're taking care of family needs, as if that should have been something we ever had to hide. But it certainly was more the case before, where as a female executive I felt that I had to I was very quiet about my family responsibilities. It's almost like I didn't really speak about that. But one of the great things about doing a lot of these video calls during the pandemic is that you saw people at home. You heard their kids, you heard the dog, we all, kind of became real people with these real lives. Yeah. And I think that was really authentic. It was really nice to see that, and it created the connections where we couldn't meet face to face, but we actually could see the real person behind, the professional curtain as well. So I appreciated that. And I think the only thing I would say, about Asia is, in the past, FaceTime in the office was so important, right? Just sort of being physically present in the office for hours and hours of the day. Yeah. As a manager in some offices, I really had to tell people, please go home. You really, you don't need to be here until 8:00. I don't need to see. I believe, you're hardworking. You don't have to physically perform the hardworking by just sort of being in the office for all hours. And I really think also that shifted as well, which is really important. And I'm sure, Jackie, as you said, sort of changes how workplaces are even conceived. And so I'm glad we're thinking about all of these things, as as a company, we're relocating people. We're thinking about these issues. We're thinking about, how they should work. We're thinking about, what will impact people positively when they move to new environments with, all of our coaching programs. So I do think that, as far as Crown in the last 25 years that I've seen, I think we've come a long way as well. And so it's made it a lot easier for me to sort of think about women having a lot of diverse and long careers where we might not have to think about off-ramping and on-ramping. It's all kind of much more seamless and a lot more progressive.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's a different your perspective kind of ties in everything that we're saying and kind of rounds it up. And to end this section, we're almost at the end of our podcast actually, but I'd like to ask you, Jackie, is there such a thing as a woman-friendly workplace? I mean, does such a place even exist? And is this something that comes up in consultations when you're talking to clients about designing an office?
So when we approach a workplace study, we don't look at gender, to be honest. I mean, there are maybe some practical things that you need to address if it is a predominantly an all-male workforce. If you're about to redesign the office space, you need to give some thought to the number of toilets on each floor and all of those sorts of things. But we don't generally look at it gender specific. We look at it from who the business are, and how that make up, what the personality types actually is more important. Are you dealing with introverts or extroverts, and what type of space do they need to support the work that they do? But yeah, there are some areas, obviously, mothers returning to work need certain areas where they can, if they're nursing their baby still, they need to be able to express milk and have that somewhere private to be able to do that and store it. Things like multi-use toilets are very emotive. We get a lot of pushback on that kind of thing. So, as long as you've got a really good cleaning regime, then that all gets resolved pretty quickly. But yeah, there's nothing I would say that's women specific. More, I think it's about understanding the workforce's needs as a whole and adapting the business to support that.
Just listening to you talk, Jackie, A, it's fascinating, and B, I'd never really thought about it, but when you're designing a workplace, it's like a reflection of what's going on in society. You just touched on some topics there I wouldn't have even thought would be a consideration when you're constructing an office or reworking an office space.
And also things like prayer rooms and those sorts of spaces, you need to look at the makeup of your workforce and cater to that, because that's a requirement in a number of religions. So, it's we're becoming all-encompassing as employers in the space that we provide now. So it's a good thing to see, I think.
Yeah, and a friend of mine was telling me they have cooling rooms in one of their offices for menopausal women going through hot flashes.
Right. Okay, never heard that one, but that's good.
Put that on the list, Jackie.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had drying rooms where people have wanted to cycle to work that need to have their shower and then dry their clothes, but never a cooling room.
Okay, and to end this discussion, my last question to each of you is, what is your hope for the future of women in the workplace? It's a loaded one, isn't it?
I mean, I think I touched on it earlier. I hope we're not having the same conversation in 10 years' time about lack of representation at senior leadership level. Less than 10% of CEOs in US leading companies are women, and that's not the demographic of the workforce. And I think we're missing a trick. I did a roundtable on women in work almost 10 years ago, and there was a study that said if you've got women in CEO positions, they looked at 366 companies, and they're 15% more likely to exceed financial goals if you've got a demographic on your board that better represents your company. So I think the future for women in work is bright. I hope it moves a bit quicker than it's done in the last 10 years. I'd like to see more people looking like us in more roles like Sherry's. And we're lucky enough to have a female CEO at Crown, so that's pretty exciting as well. So that's what I hope for in the future.
Yeah, I kind of echo Jo's comments. In the UK, the population is actually 51% women, we outweigh the men.
We are
in the
ruling
UK.
the world.
But we're still, the gender pay gap is still disproportionate, and there aren't enough women at board level that I would, as far as I'm concerned. Those things need to be addressed, but I just think we need to be more diverse overall. I think we need to, have as many people from every walk of life, and that, I think, provides a richer workforce if we can do that.
I think representation matters, and so for all of us, and it's, I'm always so proud to go into many situations where there's so many amazing Crown women who come from all sorts of backgrounds, and all different career paths leading us to the common company we work for today. But my one wish for women is, beyond how companies can support women to continue to climb in their careers and reach senior roles, I also want to say I really do hope that the people in our lives, for women, the men in our lives, they continue to support in the ways where maybe the bulk of caregiving or thinking about how to make it all work doesn't fall as squarely on women's shoulders as much as it does, and to the maybe degree that it does. That sharing the load in that way will make it easier for women to make these decisions. So it comes from all aspects of society, from companies, and from personal family decisions to make it happen.
Wonderful.
What about you, Reema? What do you want?
Well, I think when women support women, wonderful things happen. And I really believe in that phrase, because in my life and career, I've had lots of women, support me and lift me up when I've needed it. So I believe very strongly in mentorship, and I believe very strongly also in women giving themselves that opportunity, like to, personally develop yourself, follow your dreams, to be able to actually own that space and claim that space when you have the opportunity, because we often don't do that. So that is my hope for women. And I'd certainly hope that men, as well in our lives, support women to get to where they are, because an equal world doesn't just benefit women, it benefits men as well. So that is my hope. And with that, we've come to the end of our podcast. So thank you so much for joining us today. I think we've had a really interesting discussion. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of it. There's so much to discuss on this topic, but it's been very enriching. And thank you all for joining me today.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you to Reema and her superb panel. Don't forget, you can read a whole load of different tips, tricks and advice articles from Crown Worldwide Group and its family of specialist logistics businesses by heading to crownworldwide.com, and by following our global brands on all the usual social media channels. Thank you to all of you for listening. Please join us again soon for another episode of CrownCast. Bye for now.